Welcome to Easy Investing Income. Today, I want to share with you one of the greatest ways to make passive income, and that's actually earning dividends. Now, when you pair that with options, it's kind of a dream made in heaven. I'm going to share with you my goals related to dividends, how I've recently reached my goals. I'm also going to share with you a couple stocks that pay really good dividends. So stay tuned. I think you're really going to enjoy what I have for you. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right in. Quick market update. I don't think much has changed. I do believe the Fed's going to hold steady. I don't think they're going to increase or decrease rates the rest of this year or even into next quarter. I do think they may have a rate cut or two in second quarter, like maybe around the May time frame. That could all change if something major happens between now and then, but I don't think they're going to do any massive cuts. I think these are going to be quarter point cuts, and they're going to keep rates around that 4.5 to 5%. Unfortunately, that will keep the interest on loans higher, but during this time period, it's been really good for people who are retiring or in retirement because these higher rates has been a great way to make additional income. Now, another piece of news that I got earlier today was that Google has released a new AI product, Gemini, that might also have a major impact on the industry. Developers and people who, want to use that can use it and may be able to use it without having to use expensive chips. I believe it'll be in the operating system. So it may have a major impact. I believe they're doing something a lot like what Microsoft has done, where they keep throwing more and more in the operating system. So it's important to keep an eye on it. It may have an impact on NVIDIA and some of the other AI related companies. So I just wanted to add that. I'm by trade a developer, so I'd like to keep track of those kinds of things. So whenever anything changes, I'll try to bring that to your attention. So let's jump into the main piece of the video here, which is one thing I wanted to add is for a lot of people, doing all the different types of option strategies can become very difficult. It can be a little bit more complex than what you want to do. One really safe strategy that you can do, and I think it's by far the safest strategy, is to have a portfolio full of dividend paying stocks and then just sell covered calls. One thing I share in my memberships is for people to double their dividends if they can by selling just covered calls. And I've been able to do that. So if you have a stock that's paying 4%, you can earn like 8%. So you can kind of do the math yourself to get an idea on how that works. And covered calls, if you're not familiar with them, someone will pay you some money for the opportunity to buy your stock. So you could say, well, I'm willing to sell my stock that's currently at $50 at 55 3 months from now, and someone would pay you a nice piece of change in order to have that opportunity to buy those. And that's what covered calls are. And the reason it's called covered is because you own the stock. So you have 100 shares for each contract that you might want to sell. So it's another way to bring in easy premiums, extra income. It's not as passive as dividends. Dividends to me are the most passive type of income you can earn. They literally are deposited in your account, and they either come 4 times a year if the company pays quarterly, or they come literally monthly if it's a distribution that is given on a monthly basis. Then they're deposited in your account on a monthly basis. So literally no work. It just happens automatically, which I think is great. Now, again, I've mentioned this in every video. What's really key is picking the right companies, picking good companies, companies that pay, like I said, pay dividends, but not just high yielding dividends, but are growing these dividends and have plenty of cash to continue to grow them. Some companies may have really high yields, but it may be because they're going through a rough time. Those aren't the companies you want. You want companies that pay an okay yield, but what's really surprising about them is how they're growing their dividends and how they have a lot of cash to cover those dividends. Just want to make sure that's clear. You also want to be sure that these companies don't have a lot of debt, especially with these higher interest rates. You also want to look at year over year earnings. How are they going to be doing next quarter, and next year, not just how they're doing today or how they did last month. You want an idea of how they're going to do going forward. Um, and then once you've identified those good companies that hopefully also pay dividends, you can then focus on trying to double those dividends. And that's usually my goal when it comes to covered calls. And again, it makes a really good return on investment. So, like I said before, if you're earning between, three, and I've got some dividends that are like 3% or 2.5 to go all the way up to 6 or 7%. So if you're able to double them, and we'll just use the 6%, then that's 12%. And if you feel up to it, you could also sell cash secured puts before you purchase the stock, which would again even increase your return on investment even higher. So, and what I've found by selling cash secured put and running what's called the wheel, I can bring in about another 1% on a monthly basis. So if you pair that with your dividends, 3 to 4%, maybe as high as 5 to 6 in certain instances, with your covered calls, again 4 to 5 to 6%, and then up to 12% running the wheel selling cash secured puts, you could end up doing 15 to 18% on a yearly basis. And that's what my goal is. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's what I'm sharing with my memberships and people. Of course, people who are watching these videos. If you want to learn more about how I'm doing this and curious about my memberships, you can find more details below. In the description, I'll have details about each membership. And as always, please subscribe, hit that like button. I really want to get the word out that you can do so well with selling options and dividends. Next, one thing that is really interesting is now if you own covered calls and the stock increases significantly and it becomes what's called in the money, meaning the strike price is lower than the stock price, it's a little bit less risky than, say, puts. I've had some, and one of the ones I'm going to share with you today, I've had one stock, Con Edison, that's literally been in the money for 2 years, and I've just been continuing to earn those dividends and write covered calls on it, and it's worked out really well. So what I found is the deeper you go in the money, the more risk you have of it being assigned early. And that's usually what you worry about. You don't want it to be assigned away from you. You want to own those stocks and keep them. So, and I believe, just like I've talked about in previous videos, that I think you're okay until you get more than 10% in the money. So let me give you a quick example. So if you have $100 stock and it goes up to 110 and your strike price is 100, then you need to be worrying about it. Now, if the stock, goes up to 105 or 108 or 107, you're typically okay. Now, I typically will try to roll up and out in those instances because I don't want to give up the stock. So I tried to roll it out maybe another month or 2 months or 3 months and increase the strike price. So for the same instance, if it goes up to 110, I will try to roll it up to 110 and get it at that point. And again, when you're dealing with dividend payers, they typically don't grow like crazy. They're usually not the biggest growers. So you usually have a chance, if it does come back down again, to, you'll buy yourself more time to, have it get out of the money again. And I found that in a lot of cases. Sometimes it'll pop up, and you'll be in the money, and then literally a week or two later it'll come back down. And the reverse is also true of puts. Sometimes you'll be in the money and you give the market a little bit more time and it'll come out up and out of the being in the money. And it's a matter of just having enough time to deal with that. So my point being, don't panic just because it's a little bit in the money. If it's more than that 10%, then you need to worry a little bit more of early assignment. But if it's not, at that 10%, at least I found you don't have to worry as much. Now, of course, if it goes across expiration, meaning, you're in the money and it's the day of expiration, you will be assigned. Everything is always assigned on expiration if it's in the money. And sometimes you run across cases where it may not be in the money. It may be $1 or $2 out of the money. And literally after hours, after the market closes, it still gets triggered because after hours that stock changes and it still will get assigned. So if you're close to being in the money, I'd suggest you try to roll it a day or two before the expiration date. Never typically wait to the expiration date to do a roll or to make a change at that time. I typically will do it the week before or early the week it's expiring. The other important point related to covered calls is ex-dividend dates. Ex-dividend dates are really critical, and that's the date. If you're not familiar with what an ex-dividend date, that's the cutoff date for earning the dividend. So you literally, if you're owning or you sold a covered call, you want to be sure you're keeping track of when that ex-dividend date is, because if it's anywhere near the money, it could potentially trigger an early assignment. So if you're slightly out of the money or you're in the money and you go across an ex-dividend date, just the nature of the ex-dividend date increases the chance of early assignment. So I typically will write down or keep track of those ex-dividend dates and try to roll or do something with a covered call, especially a covered call, before that ex-dividend date, because you know actually it would be better to do it almost like a week ahead. So almost use that like an expiration date. So in the instances for covered calls when I've been assigned early, and I haven't been assigned early probably in over 2 years, has always been related to ex-dividend dates. So they're really critical to keep an eye on. So that's the main points, and the fact that you can earn such good income with dividends, and then you can double the dividends, and then you can add another piece by selling cash secured puts is really huge. So in the next part of this video, I'm going to jump in and share with you two particular stocks that have worked out really well for me. One is Con Edison, that's been in the money for literally, like I said, 2 years. And I'm also going to share with you the income screen for Schwab, so you can actually see that. I'll show you my goals, what they were and where they are now, by sharing with you that income screen. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of it, but it's one of the features I really like about Schwab's online portal. I haven't found the same thing in Fidelity. I'm hoping to find it in Fidelity, but let's jump into that and I'll show you what I'm talking about, and then we'll go into the two stocks. So stay around. Let's jump into the next part. Okay, now I've got my Schwab account open, and this is the income screen, investment income. And I really like how Schwab does this. I wish Fidelity would do it too. I may show this to Fidelity and see if I can encourage them to do something like this, unless they have something and I just haven't found it. But here you can see up on the top left the investment income. So this is for 2022. So back in 2022, I was earning just shy of 19,000, 1573 on a monthly basis. And at that time, I decided I wanted to see if for the end of 22, if I could be at closer to 1,800 on a monthly basis, and my ultimate goal being to reach 2,000 by 2023. So here it shows you how much you're bringing in each month. So you can see some months, especially the quarterly payments from the different companies, you get a lot more in certain months. So budgeting does make a difference. And then sometimes you get capital gains distributions, which also come as dividends that are a little bit more at the end of the year. So it's just nice to see it graphically in this way. Now, for 23, you can see I'm at 1864. So I went from 1573 to 1864, and you can, again, every month you're seeing a little bit more. Now, interest is a little bit higher too, so it's not just dividends, it's also the fact that I am getting more interest. Schwab is also paying a bit more, but nothing like, what I want to earn, which is the 5%. Now, I have found recently that in the brokerage, you can move a lot of your funds over to one of their, I think it's SWVXX, and you can still use that income just like you do at Fidelity, but I found that you can't do that in the retirement accounts. I'm still researching it and sharing with my members what I find out. But so currently I'm keeping my brokerages at Schwab, and I'm looking at moving all my retirement accounts at Fidelity. Now, if something changes between now and towards the end of the year, I might change that decision. But right now, currently, that's what I'm looking at. So here you can see I went from 1570 to 1864, and now I can look at the next 12 months, and you'll see I've literally reached 2073 a month, almost 2074, which is awesome. I mean, being able to reach a much higher objective, and this is primarily through buying a couple of stocks. I think I bought like JEPI, JEPI. I also bought, I only have 50 shares of TSLY. I don't, I'm kind of getting a feel for that. A lot of people really like, it's based on Tesla and it's related to options. I forget the actual fund name, but I believe it's a little bit risky. I almost feel like they're paying too many distributions, but I do have 50 shares in that, so I can track it and see what goes on long term. And then I've bought more SCHD, which pays a nice dividend. And then I've also recently had some assignments like BMY, Bristol Myers was assigned to me not too long ago. So I've also had some companies that pay higher dividends. So my goals aren't just how much I can earn selling options premium wise, but also increasing my dividends. So for this year, I've reached my goal. I'll need to decide next year. If you have an idea, what should my goal be for dividends next year? I'm thinking something like 2,200 on a monthly basis, or maybe slightly more. If you're, leave a comment below if you think I should do a little bit more than that, or a little bit less, or not worry about dividends as much. I'd be curious to what your opinions are. Now let's actually jump into two of the different companies. Now this was just exported out of my Schwab account using the history page. You can put in the ticker symbol and then you can say include options, and this information is provided and you can export it. Now I saved it as an Excel spreadsheet and just rearranged a tiny bit, spent maybe 5 minutes rearranging it. But this is for Southern Company, and I've owned Southern Company for many years, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like with earning the dividends as well as the premiums from the covered call. So here you can see with Southern Company, you can see the dividends. This is a $140 dividend, and here are all the different covered calls. Let's start back. We'll go from the top. This is the most recent. So I did very recently get a dividend of $140, and then I rolled a covered call for Southern Company fairly recently. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because it makes the videos really long, but this just goes back the last couple of years, and you can see all the dividends that are provided, as well as the income from selling covered calls. And what I wanted to show here is the 3150, and this goes back to October of 2020. I brought in between dividends and covered call income 3150, which is the total. And then on a yearly average, that's 1,050. And then the yearly dividend average is right at 517. So again, I mentioned my goal is to double my dividends, and in this case, I have. So just this one stock, and it was originally just one contract. Now it's two contracts, so now it is 200 shares. Originally it was just 100 shares, or so I did increase the number of shares at one point, but you could still see on average that I was able to double the dividends. And Southern Company I like. It's not my favorite company currently, but it does okay with dividends, and since it's a utility, you can kind of depend on its dividends, and it doesn't move like crazy. It doesn't shoot through the roof or go way down. It's been a very consistent earner. So let's jump into the next one. Now, this is Con Edison. This is the one I was talking about that has been in the money for a long, long time. You can see that because of how expensive some of these calls that I've closed and rolled. So here you can see I've spent $6, $8, $8.38 to open a new one, and $6.24 to close it. So I rolled it and still made like $200 on it. And that's what my typical goal is for 2 contracts, I try to get $100 for each contract every time I roll or open up a new position. And these I did go a little bit farther out. I went out. I rolled a 119.24 to May 17th, and a lot of times I'm rolling even options that are far into the future. I've rolled leaps, you know, out to different leaps. I've rolled, something expiring in 6 months to 9 months. Very rarely have I rolled backwards. But if a stock goes down big time, that's happened with Coca-Cola. Suddenly, a lot of my leaps were worth like nothing hardly. So I could close. I ended up closing a bunch of Coca-Cola leaps earlier this year. And Coca-Cola is still struggling a little bit. At some point, I probably will write several more leaps once Coke is up into the low 60s. But Con Edison's been a good company. I've owned it since, I believe I owned both Southern Company and Con Edison since the early 2000s. Maybe, well, this one I think I bought in 2014. Southern Company, I'm not sure. But here you can see the dividends. You could see, again, with these being so expensive, it was definitely in the money. And that's usually a side product of being in the money. But here again, I brought in 3,354 and I spent 3,027. So even with rolling deep in the money, I still did pretty well with Con Edison. And it pays a really good dividend. I can't remember exactly what it is. I think it's 4.5%. But total between the covered calls for the last, this is more like 2 years, 2.5 years, I brought in about 3,000 and not, well, not about, but $3,095, almost 96. The yearly average was 1,031. And then I doubled the dividends again. So not quite doubled. This is, I think if you scroll down, you see nearly double the dividend. So I was really close. So again, if you find these companies like Con Edison and Southern Company that pay good dividends and you can double them, just doing that alone gets you a nice return. I believe Con Edison may be like a 4.5%. So it'd be like 8 to 9% when you double the dividend. So that's what I wanted to show you guys. As always, this will be available to any of my members if they want these, to see these kind of sheets, even though they're just exports. Sometimes people do want to see them. I actually provide all my different spreadsheets to my members. So, and as always, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please leave a comment. I try to answer every comment that I get. And sorry if I'm getting a little hoarse. I have with my membership, I provide coaching, and I had 3 coaching calls before doing this video, so I'm a little wiped out. So hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for joining me.